and send it out to Sara Eisen live in Davos. Sara.
Good morning, Brian. And with me now is Bill Browder, one of the most outspoken critics of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is thrust in the middle of Russian-U.S. relations this past summer as Putin sought his return to the country. Browder, also famously big proponent of the Magnitsky Act, a law that punishes human rights violators named for his lawyer. Bill, good to see you.
Great to be here.
So you're enemy number one of Putin, and instead of hiding out, you're here again. What, 23rd year at the World Economic Forum?
This is my 23rd year, and 10 years since Vladimir Putin has put a price on my head. But, I'm not scared. I'm not backing down. And I'm going after them for the murder of Sergei Magnitsky, my lawyer, who was killed on November 16, 2009. And one of the main reasons I'm here in Davos is to make sure that I'm talking to all the policymakers here to hold Russia to account.
And what sort of reception are you getting this year?
Well, Russia used to be the most welcome crowd in Davos. They were putting money out here, there, and everywhere.
Parties.
The biggest parties, the caviar, the champagne. Now I'm sure they would like to have that, but a lot of Western businessmen don't want to be seen associating with Russian oligarchs. Though
some of the sanctions have been rolled back, including on Oleg Deripaska, one of the oligarchs we mentioned that's been here in Davos.
Well, even worse than that, Oleg Deripaska and two other oligarchs were kicked out of Davos temporarily, and then they were somehow able to come back into Davos. And so, the Russians get into a lot of trouble with a lot of stuff, cheating in the elections, cheating in the Olympics, sanctions, et cetera. And then they just kind of slowly grind away and try to find their way back into the system.
What's your relationship with the Trump administration on this issue?
Well, I've got a lot of different relationships. Donald Trump, at the Helsinki summit with Putin, wanted to hand me over to the Russians.
Open to it.
At the same time, his administration has been, some of the people in his administration have been highly supportive of sanctioning Russians and sanctioning Russians under the Magnitsky Act. And so it's a mixed bag as far as Trump and his administration goes.
I want to bring in my colleague, Brian Sullivan, who is back at headquarters. Brian.
Yeah, Bill. Hey, Bill, good to, quote, see you across the way there. And thanks for joining Sara and the team. Listen, I want to sort of follow up on Sara's question because you mentioned the president, but I know you've done interviews about this as well. And by the way, I saw you got ambushed by Russian state TV yesterday. I thought you had a nice comeback to them. But the question is this: what is driving U.S.-Russia policy? Is it oil right now? Is it defense? Is it Syria? Is it that pipeline that is going from Russia to Germany? There seems to be a lot of questions about what the mutual goals might be.
So Putin's main goal is he's got three goals. He wants to he hates powerful opponents. He doesn't like NATO. He doesn't like the EU, who can stand up to him, and he doesn't like a strong America. And so Putin's main goal is to try to break up any strength in the West. And that means breaking up the EU. He loves Brexit. It means weakening NATO. And it means creating chaos in the United States. And he loves the fact that everybody is at each other's throats in the United States, because that means they can't focus on him and all the sort of criminal activities that he's trying to do around the world.
Wanted to pick up your point on the EU because, here in Davos, we look at a downgrade to the global economy, and a lot of it is falling on Europe, which is slowing down again. Does that make it a weaker geopolitical partner when it comes to this issue and all the other important ones?
Absolutely. So if you have a situation where you have a weaker economy that creates populism then creates all these right-wing parties that Putin can support, which he does support. He gives them money openly. And then that creates a situation when Russia does something terrible, like chemical weapons attacks in the center of England, you don't have consistency on sanctions because you have all these Putin acolytes in different political parties in Europe that are saying, well, maybe we need to be more reasonable with Russia. Maybe we need to see their side of the story about poisoning people in Salisbury or whatever.
So where are we right now? Because we have populist threats all over. I mean, Prime Minister May and President Trump aren't even here in Davos because of their own domestic crises. And where does that leave the relationship in 2019 with Russia and fighting off this threat? Well,
what it means is that Russia is winning because they've created all this chaos. I mean, and it's not just Germany and France. Macron's not here either. And so one of the tweets I put out at the very beginning is that with France, UK, and the US not here, you have a disproportionate number of dictatorships versus democracies here in Davos. And that's true just sort of generally in terms of the voices of the world right now.
Bill Browder, we thank you for speaking out on this important issue, as always.
Thank you.
Of Hermitage Capital. Brian, back to you. I'll be back in a bit. CEO of BMO.
We'll see that. Sara and Bill, thank you both very much. Sara, we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Capital Markets, 8th largest bank in North America. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So 90% of your business is U.S. and Canada.
Yeah.
How would you characterize the North American economy right now?
Yeah, you know, I find it's the big question, isn't it, that we're having a conversation all around here about. But I think it's interesting. I think we're obviously in an inflection point, but I think perspective is really important, Sara. When I look at the dialogue that says, let's compare everything we talk about today to 1 year ago today to the minute, and then you could paint one picture, but I'm going to paint a different picture for you, because in that first picture you could say, well, at that point in time, we had the benefit of fiscal stimulus in the United States. We had some emergence in Europe that looked pretty positive, and we had the global synchronized growth story. Then you can juxtapose that today and say, well, we've got a government shutdown, and Brexit looks like it's off the rails, and we've got trade problems all over the world, and those are two drastically different stories, and therefore we have a huge problem. Or you could say, imagine 2 or 3 years ago, we forecasted in 2019, and you asked me what I thought 2019 was going to look like, and I said, we'll probably have U.S. GDP in the 2 to 2.5% range. Everybody who wants a job will have a job. Borrowing costs are still near all-time lows, and we won't have inflation above 2%. You would probably say, yeah, it's not bad. You'd probably say it's a central banker's dream, right? They work their whole lives to work up that story. That's where we are today. So I'm less concerned about the conversation relative to where we were a year ago. The question is, of course, what's happening in the businesses that we service, and our clients are still in pretty good spirits. They're spending, the consumer spending, the capital formation at the corporate level is good. It's real. There's absolutely no question we're slowing down, but I don't see evidence in our businesses that we're slowing to a halt.
Or recession risks.
Well, if we have, let's say 2 to 2.5% GDP growth in the United States this year, that's exactly the average of the 7 years post-global financial crisis when we grew. So recession risks, are we closer than we were? Of course we are, but it does not in any way, shape, or form feel imminent in the businesses that we serve. USMCA
is a big deal for you. This is the new NAFTA. How's it affecting business and the economies of the U.S. and Canada, and do you assume that it will pass Congress?
I do assume it'll pass Congress. I assume that the agreement would be struck a year ago. We're glad, of course, that it did. I would say the predominant sense in Canada was relief and expectation that it would be passed. I think I've said before, I think that's the most successful commercial trading relationship in the history of modern commerce, frankly. So fundamentals prevail, usually, and they did in this case, and I think it'll pass Congress.
U.S.-China relationship and the tensions there get a lot of attention here, but Canadian-China relationships are strained right now. How would you describe what's going on between these two countries?
You know, again, I'd go to perspective, Sara. There's been a very long history between these two countries. Even in our own bank, we started doing business in the United States and China, in Canada, almost 200 years ago. So for the fullness of time, I think the relationships will survive, and I think they'll survive soundly. There'll be twists in the road. I think we're in one of those right now. You've got the two biggest economies in the world, and I think the dependency is there, and I think those
You're talking U.S. and China.
Yeah, and I'm also saying that we are trading partners with each of them. And so in Canada, this situation that you're referring to, we're monitoring it, it matters, but at the same time, the relationships prevail over time.
Brian's talked a lot about oil prices on the move as a result of Venezuela today. I mean, we had that big downturn last year. How has that left the Canadian economy? Certainly the currency has gotten a lot cheaper.
Yeah, the currency has gotten a lot cheaper. And if you look at the Canadian dollar relative to the U.S. dollar over time, it doesn't get very far away from the price of oil's movements. So on the other hand, as you know, it puts more dollars in the pockets of the consumer when the oil price is lower. So the Canadian economy has been pretty resilient. The biggest impact is, in fact, on the currency, and therefore the knock-on impact of that is on the export environment, which is good. So we've got a bit of a natural hedge in the oil currency right now.
One more on cannabis, because it is now legal in Canada. Is that an opportunity at all? Is there any bank action going on in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, there is, and we've been part of that action in the sense that we were banking and supporting select clients in the cannabis industry before you're referring to the legalization from a recreational perspective.
Right.
When it was legal, and it has been for a very long time from a medical perspective. So we've been in this business for a very long time, and we continue to be in it.
Do you feel that Canada is going to lead the U.S., or are we going to go in different directions on this one?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the U.S. is going to do. I can't speak for the legislature, but I think there's some progress being made for sure.
Darrell White, Nice to check in with you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Sarah.
for coming by.
Thank you.
The CEO of BMO. Back to you, Brian.
All right, Sara Eisen. Sara, thank you very much. Meantime, our mysterious ways from the high elevation of Davos will continue later this morning. We're going to find out if that guy, Bono, has found what he was looking for.